Hi all, we are live. Welcome to our Sales U session. We are waiting of Richard Young because he has unfortunately some technical issues, but I'm sure he will jump in as soon as he can. Today we have Richard Ruff, Richard Ruff. And Richard, I would like to ask you if you can give us a little background about you, tell us what are you doing, and yes, please go forward.
Great, thanks, Martha, and thanks to you for inviting me to the session. And I'd like to welcome everyone who has joined us. Background-wise, educationally, I did my undergraduate work at an engineering school called Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and that went on and did my doctoral work at the University of Tennessee in organizational psychology. Work-wise, I've been doing the sales training business for 25 plus years. I started with a company called Huthway, which is one of the leading companies in the sales training space. They're the creators of spin selling, which has a pretty good reputation worldwide. They also had a Huthway Research Group in England. And I stayed there for 20 plus years. And then in the year 2000, my partner and I started Sales Momentum. And the purpose there was to really create a whole new generation of sales training programs. We tended to specialize in the B2B market, working with market-leading companies. We specifically spent a lot of time in the healthcare space and with high technology companies. Lately, our newest developments are moving stuff online, trying to take and leverage some of the advantage of the technology that now exists to make training a little more effective, a little more affordable. So that's a quick background. You can learn more about us at our website, salesmomentum.com or saleshorizons.com. We have two separate websites. And we also blog 3 times a week. So if you're somebody who likes to read blogs, you can go to salestrainingconnection.com. And there's about 500 or so articles on there. And we cover a pretty wide variety of topics. So a quick background, Martha.
Thanks. So I see Richard is here. Hi, hosting partner.
Hello. Slight technical difficulties. My speaker's decided not to work on me. Isn't that typical?
Richard.
Hey, Dick. How you doing?
We're good. We're good.
Excellent. That's good to know.
So far, we've just given the background and are quite frankly ready to jump into the first question. So I assume we'll just kind of go through the questions one by one and go from there.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Okay, so the first question we have is, what are your predictions for the future of sales training?
Right. Well, indeed, that's a good first question. Let me give a little context for that one because it really is important.
Yeah.
I think today companies are finding it more and more difficult to win by product alone.
Yes. Yeah.
What's driving that, obviously, is advanced manufacturing technologies, global competition. So what happens is even if you have a great product, the competition is liable to come out with something just as good in half the time of yesteryear, and worse yet, it's liable to be cheaper. What that means is that a company has to have a sales team, I think, that can not only sell a competitive advantage, they have to be a competitive advantage. They have to sell value, I think, and so that they can bring value to the customer by the way they sell as well as by what they sell. Well, that's a really superior sales force. That requires a lot of training. So I think the first comment I would have on the notion of the future of sales training is it's going to be important because sales are becoming more important.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I think it's I think a good example of that at the moment, exactly what you've just said, is with Samsung, and of course they've got the Android phones, the S4, the
Yes.
S5, and they're coming out with the S6, and what they're finding is that because because the competition can catch up with them and do the Me Too so much quicker than previously, that their leading edge technology isn't quite so leading edge anymore, and they need to build, as Apple have done with the iPhone, that whole mystique and brand image around the Samsung, which they haven't needed to do until this point.
Right. That's a change in the game. I think the other game changer is I think customers' expectations have changed. I think today customers expect sales reps to be more than just product facilitators. They're really looking for trusted advisors. And what that means is it's going to be harder to develop a superior sales force because that's a more skilled person.
Absolutely.
So the sort of general answer to the question is I think training is going to be more important, but I think it's going to be also a situation where we're going to have to up our game. I think we're going to have to do a better job, all the people that are engaged in the training industry than we did yesteryear, because I think the demands are going to be greater.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a general thing. But I think there are some specifics, you know, to the question about what are some of the futures. One, I think we're going to have to do a better job in leveraging technology. There's new instructional methodologies, you know, online learning, for example, or experiential learning. For example,
Yeah.
I think in the future, you're going to see a lot more blended instruction, where part of the instruction is done online and part is done in the classroom. That makes the whole training enterprise more affordable, and I think in the long run will be more effective. So that's one change I see, more leveraging of different instructional technologies rather than just standing up in front of the group with 100 PowerPoint slides.
Mm-hmm. Bruno Wink mentioned a very interesting point. He said there will be more self-managed learning. Learners will curate from a choice of resources. What do you think about that?
I think that's right. I think today versus, say, even 10 years ago, there's all kinds of sources for learning. As a matter of fact, if I was a senior VP of sales, I think one of the things I would push is the generation of a learning culture inside my organization. I think if you really want to get a superior sales force, you're going to have to be continually learning stuff. And to the comment, there's lots of sources to use. There are some really smart blog sites. There are some really great webinars. There's some really great online learning. Well, and all that stuff is free or very low cost. So there's no excuse for not continually getting smarter. And I think the need is there, and I think the resources are there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's absolutely true. I think certainly when I first entered the sort of sales arena, what you would have, and certainly still happens to this day, is you have the quarterly or annual sales conference.
Oh, yes.
And you all turn up at a hotel. It's the first time you've seen a lot of the guys for a long time. You know what happens? The first night is spent in the bar catching up. Invariably, there's somebody, or perhaps more than a few somebodies, who are up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning having a few too many glasses of champagne, etc. And then they've got the sales training in the morning after the kickoff. They're not focused. They can barely remember to tie their shoelaces half the time. So when they turn up and they have this training, it just doesn't sink in.
Well,
I think
that's a great example. I mean, that's one of those bad ideas that keeps getting reinvented. We should just stop that. Stop doing that because it doesn't work. I think a couple of the other specifics that will probably characterize the future. Not only will the instructional methodology change, I think the content will need to change. For example, I think the notion about becoming a trusted advisor, I think what that requires is sort of a second level product knowledge. I mean, we do a pretty decent job, I think, in training and teaching features and functions of products. But I think in the future, you're going to have to know more than that. You're going to have to know how your product solves business problems. You're going to have to be able to have a compelling conversation with clients about how your products can help them reduce risk, how they can help generate revenue, how they can help reduce cost. And you're going to have to be able to have that narrative in a very compelling fashion. And you're going to have it with lots of different kinds of people so that it's not the same one every time. That's a second level product knowledge that a lot of sales reps don't have. They can do features until the cows come home, but when it comes to really relating their products to solve business problems, that requires a higher level knowledge. And I think that will characterize the future, and we've got to step up the game and be able to train folks to do that. Just a third comment, Richard, on future. I think the other thing that sales training really needs to do, and those of us in the profession need to get serious about it, is we need to better align sales training with the strategic initiatives of the company. If the company, for example, is moving from selling individual products to selling an integrated solution, that's a big change. Salespeople can't just wake up Monday morning and be able to do that. So design training specifically to address that business initiative versus just buying another program. I think that's going to be more and more in the future because we're going to have training really be helpful in helping people to drive business initiatives rather than simply doing training. Then it becomes cost justifiable.
Yeah. Dick, today our participants are very happy. We received another question from Barb. She would like to hear your thoughts about mobile. So she believes that mobile be huge for the future of sales training, and she would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, Barbara, I think you're right on the money. You know, if you're running, for example, a sales training company and you don't have mobile solutions, you're in serious trouble. I think, for example, if you were doing a program, let's say on basic skills, you were trying to teach people to ask questions and listening skills and handling objections, you know, classic call execution stuff. One of the things you ought to do is you ought to provide people an application on smartphones that would reinforce that training, so that when a sales rep was sitting waiting to go into a sales call and they said, oh, hey, I want to really remind myself about some of those best practices about handling objection, they could just go to their iPhone, turn it on, and look at what was talked about in class. There's just no reason not to do that. You can generate those apps, quite frankly, very cost effectively. I see it particularly used in reinforcing programs as well as having people to augment training when special needs arise. So a company, if they're launching a new product, for example, then they ought to update their sales force in selling that new product by generating an app specifically around the skill sets indigenous to that product. So I think Barbara's right on the money. We're gonna have to do that. We're gonna have to do that.
Absolutely. I think it's still good to have that face-to-face training if you can, because there's nothing to replace the experience of being able to talk back and forth and engage with an expert in the sales method or process and have that come across. But having said that, as soon as you've left the room, I think the problem is the training, as we all know from any training of any type, you forget huge amounts of it within the first few days. Right. So a digital product, whether it's on the web, on your phone or your tablet, whatever, which reinforces on a continual basis that training, is exactly what you need.
I mean, I think you'll see that. I think mainly because I don't think sales training companies can stay in business if they don't get aboard that train.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. It's relatively easy to do. I mean, you can use there are a variety of sales analytical tools which will help with that, but you could use something as simple, which is free, as something called Flipboard. I don't know if you've seen that, at flipboard.com. Right. That's a great little tool. You can push stuff to it from your website or your provider's website, and that's then a magazine-style interface for flicking through on your phone or your tablet, reinforcing material.
For example, you know, in the past, you know, I've written a number of books, and we published them, you know, with people like Prentice Hall and McGraw-Hill, and we don't do that anymore. I'll never write another book where I publish it with a publisher. We do nothing but ebooks now. They're shorter, they're styled differently. You got to be able to call them up on your iPad. It's a whole different thing. I don't know why you would publish a book, quite frankly. Sales reps are not going to read that. You've got to be able to chunk the information so that it's readily available. It's very difficult to do that in written form on a book. It's easy to do electronically.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think particularly whilst, let's just say, some people of a generation are very much used to using books and paper, etc. The reality is that the workforce coming through, the millennials, they prefer digital. They're used to it. They're happy with it, and that's how they want to communicate, and that's how they want to learn. To be quite frank, in some ways. So, you know, fantastic. Give it to them. It's easier for us to do, in actual fact, in many ways, and as a business, it's easier for us to manage and measure what they're actually looking at, which I think is pretty critical, because then you can see what they're actually reading through.
So I think those are the kinds of things that will unfold as the future unfolds.
Excellent. Okay, cool. That sounds great. So what do you think the biggest barrier to adopting these practices, best practices, are for a business-to-business organization?
Well, that's a good question too, because they are there. There's no question about that. And there, I think it's important to separate excuses from barriers. There are excuses, you know, things like the typical VP who says, well, you know, budgets are tight. You know, we're still struggling from the 2008 experience. You know, we need to postpone the training until next year, just from a budget standpoint. Or, you know, we hire experienced reps. You know, we don't really need to do training. Or I can't take my guys out of the field. I mean, I need them out to 2 days out of the field. I can't do that. Yeah. Well, those are all excuses. Those are not serious barriers, and a serious VP of sales can make those disappear in a wink of an eye. Now, barriers, on the other hand, are substantive, and I think they do exist. And there's a couple I thought about. One is, I think senior people, and when I say senior people, I mean like VPs of sales. I think many are still not really convinced that an investment in sales training is really going to pay off. There's a hesitancy about that. And one of the reasons for that is somewhere in their dark past, they had one or two really bad experiences, and they probably did, where they laid out a ton of money or went to a program and it was ill-planned and ill-done and not reinforced, and so nothing ever happened. And those are very vivid memories, you know, once burned, twice cautious kind of thing. Absolutely. So I think one of the barriers is we really have to, and this is the job of training directors and people in the field, we need to re-educate senior people on the sales side on the advances that have occurred in sales training in the last 5 years. There is some really smart stuff happening. So that was then, this is now. So you got a much better shot at it. But it is a barrier. I think it requires education. I think the other one is a research issue. I think one of the problems in sales training, and to a certain degree in sales itself, is there is no refereed research. There aren't published journal articles about the effectiveness of sales training. Very few. You know, doctoral students are not doing their dissertations on effective sales training programs. Most of the evaluations in sales training are done by sales training companies. Well, that is a
coincidentally it works well.
yes, and the results are just magnificent. Well, obviously that's a little self-serving. Now that's changing, I will grant, but I think it's a problem. I think it's a barrier. We need to put more work in doing more serious evaluations in a more refereed way. I think the other one is, I don't think training has a seat at the table. You know, when people who are sitting down say, okay, where are we going next year? Training's not there. Sales is there, you know, the finance people are there, but training's not there. So training simply gets the message. I think if we were to up our game and had a seat at the table and say, guys, if you want to go north, let me tell you how I can help you do that. If you want to move to selling an integrated solution, let me tell you some affordable, some efficient, and some effective ways that training can really help you get that initiative. So a year from now, we're not back in the same room saying it was a great plan, but it never got executed.
Yeah,
well, you can't have that discussion if you're not at the table. So somehow training has to reposition itself inside of corporations, or people in the sales training business need to do a better job in getting to senior people so that we can really tell the story. That's a barrier, I think, that if training is going to do what training can do, we have to show up. We have to be there. And I'm not sure we're there when it matters.
So there are a number of universities which are now offering MBAs and master's degrees in sales specifically. Yes. Are you aware of any of those which are beginning to look at sales training?
Yes, and I know more about that in the United States than I do in the European market. But in the United States, there's a number of colleges that they're not offering degree programs yet, but they're offering certificates. For example, I was on the board of directors for the University of Ohio. Most of them are state universities, but what they do is they say, here's our certificate program. We have 4 or 5 courses, so if you're a student in business or psychology or whatever, you can take extra courses, and when you graduate, you'll not only have an undergraduate degree in business, you'll also have this selling certificate. And the programs, a number of them are pretty good. They have great internships. They get the students out visiting sales reps in the field. So in the United States, I bet there's now maybe 20 or 30 colleges that have those kinds of programs. And some of them are just starting up. Probably this has developed in the last 5 years, but it's a very, very promising trend. And I think the next step is obviously degree granting programs so that sales becomes more than a chapter in a marketing book. Which, quite frankly, in the States, that's what it's been.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same in Europe and in the UK specifically. That is beginning to change, which I find amazing given the fact that the sales element is the revenue generator, that there wouldn't be more science behind it and they wouldn't put more effort into it. I know that in the UK you've got the University of Portsmouth, which of course Neil Rackham's actually one of the sponsors from your spin selling days. You'll obviously remember him.
Yes.
So he works on that as well. He does the first week's worth of introductions, I think. So that's a good master's degree you could get specifically in sales, and they're doing some research.
Yeah, I think that's a very promising trend, and that gets back to that referee journal thing. When you start doing that kind of stuff, then you have people doing serious research, and I think sales becomes serious, and sales training is not going to get a seat at the table if sales doesn't get more respect as well. I mean, they sort of go hand in hand.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think we need, as sales people, we need to move from being quite so emotionally driven to data driven, so that we can reinforce our point at the board level, rather than carrying this stick of responding to most things with just I can't, I won't, I shouldn't, which is of course all feeling type words, rather than saying, look, we can't do this because it just doesn't stack up. Here you can see the numbers which simply don't support what you're trying to do. If you apply the training in the right place to the execution in the right way, it's going to happen.
Yeah, to your earlier example, Richard, I mean, if it comes up, well, we're going to do the training, Friday afternoon at the national sales meeting, training ought to be at the table and saying, no. I mean,
there's no point.
Why would you do that? You may as well throw the money out the window. It's not going to work. And if we don't reinforce the program and get our people out there coaching it after they go through the program, then I can guarantee you 3 months from now, there'll be nothing left.
Absolutely.
Well, a fact.
And I've just got Bob who's saying that Kenshaw State here in Atlanta, they do an excellent sales program. So that's quite. So there's a few obviously coming through, which are beginning to get on board with the need for proper sales training and sales degrees.
Yes. I think that would be my that would be my take on the barriers issue. It's separating excuses from barriers. It's getting a seat at the table. It's getting senior people to recognize that, yeah, there were some bad old days in training, but that was then, this is now.
Yeah, absolutely. And times move on. It's time to get with the new programs.
Right.
Cool. So you've obviously, I mean, you've been involved for 30 odd years now with sales and Fortune 1000 companies. You're at Huthwaite with spin selling, etc. as well. And now you've obviously founded your own company, Sales Momentum. What's changed in that time frame, other than obviously there have been some bad providers of training?
Right. Well, I think some things have changed. I think, I have been doing it for about 25 years, and I think what's probably true, a couple of generalizations. I think there have been more changes than I've noticed in the last 5 years than the previous 15. There's some really exciting things that have happened recently, but I would say during the 80s. I can remember the early 80s, and I can remember the late 80s, and fundamentally we were doing the same thing we did at the beginning as we were, did at the end, and so was all our competitors. And we were getting the same kind of requests from customers. So during the 80s and early 90s, there was some good stuff, but there weren't a lot of changes going on. I think recently that's different, and you can see it in, for example, in the United States at least, there's a lot of really smart boutique companies that have entered the industry. They're savvy people, they're technology, they're younger, they know what the millennial generation wants in terms of training, they're into online, they understand experiential learning. Whereas in the old days, there were, in the United States, and to a certain degree worldwide, maybe a dozen companies that had 75% of the business. It was the Huthwaites, Miller Hymans, and Forums, and there was a whole list of a dozen, and they pretty much controlled the industry. Today, companies have a wide variety of choices they can choose from, and some of these new boutique companies are really doing some great work. So one of the changes is more changes occurred, I think, in the recent past than in the distant past. I think the other generalization is we probably do need to do a little bit more. I'm not sure sales training has kept pace with the changes in the buying market. There are certain industries that are going through absolutely transformational changes. For example, again in the States, because of national legislation, the healthcare industry is just going through a transformational change. Well, that requires a whole different level of training, and we need to up our game. So I think, yes, more has happened recently, but we need to continue that effort because the world is changing around us. I think a couple of specifics. I think the changes, the technology thing is evident. Back in the 80s, Richard, and even early 90s, nobody was doing online training. Very few people were doing it, and if it did, it didn't work. And experiential learning, was talked about, at Starbucks, but that's about it. It wasn't done pervasively. Whereas today it is. I mean, there's sophisticated sales simulations. I mean, really interesting stuff. So I think that the online stuff, the experiential stuff, has really evolved in the last 5 years. I mean, if you're a company and you're not seriously looking at that as part of the option, I think that's a mistake because it's there and now it works.
Yes. Well, of course, we're all originally on dial-up modems, which
yeah, I mean,
it was okay.
The early online stuff, and I mean, I was terrified because I knew something was going to break, and I didn't know how to fix it. So that's not true anymore. I think the other change that I've seen, and I think it's a good change, is people have finally done away with the notion that generic programs work. They don't. I think if you're really going to get serious, you have to do customized programs. For example, today we don't do any generic programs. We customize all of our programs for each client. Now, granted, we have templates and we have best practices that we integrate, but For example, we did a project a couple of years ago with Smith & Nephew, which is a British-based, actually, med tech company. They had 4 divisions. We did a program for them, and then they, in turn, not only did it on a worldwide basis, they customized it themselves for each of their divisions, because what they were trying to do was have a common language, but they recognized that each division was different. So they not only customized the program for their company, they customized it for each of their operating divisions. Now, I think that is an important change. I would not have seen companies doing that kind of effort 15 years ago.
Wow, so the ease of customization, obviously, from your side, and then obviously taking that forward, the mindset of the management, that they recognize it's got to be tailored to the individual teams effectively.
It's a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal because if you look at it from the rep's perspective, you're spending 2 days in the classroom. If you're talking about selling widgets and you're selling medical technology, it's really hard to keep your attention up. You have to, you have to be able to do it from just an attention perspective as well as from a learning perspective. You have to, for example, when you're doing role plays, they have to be around the specific challenges, the specific objections that you face, not some general set.
Yep.
It doesn't work. It's not worth the money.
I'd have to say that. I'd have to say that I always found that frustrating, and I don't think it particularly worked in the first place, but it was better than nothing.
Right. So those are a couple of the changes that I think, the technology thing and the recognition that customization is worth it. It's worth the investment.
Excellent, cool. Okay, so what do you think will be the salesperson's biggest skill, as such, that they could use to add value to a business-to-business company?
Well, let me think about that one a little bit. The skill set, I think, is probably going to be a composite skill set. I mentioned earlier that I think, in at least certainly in the B2B market, the customers' expectations have changed. They really do want reps who can function as a trusted advisor versus a product facilitator. Because quite frankly, they can go online and find out all kinds of information about the product and all about your competitor products. They hardly need a sales rep to spend their time talking about their product. So that's off the table. So what they want the reps to be able to do is to help them have a discussion around how can your products help us to solve our business problems. How can you help us reframe the problem? How can you help us think about solutions that we haven't thought about? That requires a different composite skill set. I think it requires that second level product knowledge that I mentioned earlier, rather than just knowing the features of the product. But it also, I think, Richard, requires some skills that we normally associate with consulting. I think, for example, that folks are going to have to be able to have a much better knowledge set in just computational skills. They have to be able to take the data that's available on CRM sites and translate it into useful information. That's a competency a lot of people don't have. I think they're going to have to be better in a transdisciplinary competency. They're going to have to be able to integrate knowledge from different areas. For example, in healthcare that I mentioned earlier. If you're a healthcare rep, you're going to have to be smart about different disease states. You're going to have to be smart about different populations. You're going to have to be smart about the new Affordable Care Act in the United States. And you're going to have to be able to integrate all that knowledge with your product knowledge in order to have a compelling conversation with the client. That's a different skill, to be able to take knowledge from different disciplines and integrate it in an understandable, memorable, compelling way with a person on the other side of the table is not done with the wink of an eye. That requires training.
Absolutely. I think that comes down to the obviously the storytelling that we hear so much about these days.
Yes. You have to be able to tell that story, and you have to be able to tell it to different people. You have to be able to tell it to the chief financial officer. You have to be able to talk to the guy who's doing the manufacturing. the story may be modified, even though the same theme is there because you're talking to a different person. You have to be able to do that. And when you watch consultants, they do that. I had a chance to, when I was with Hathaway, to do some work with McKinsey, which is a pretty good consulting firm.
Absolutely.
And to watch those folks, that's exactly what they do. That's exactly what they do. They tell the story. So it's so compelling that even though they charge an arm and a leg, price never gets on the table, because the story is so compelling. The client clearly sees the value that they're going to bring to the party. Now that is a skill. That's a trusted advisor. People will write checks for that.
Absolutely, yeah. And I have to say, it's a good job McKinsey don't put the price on the table initially, because otherwise people might choke.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Great.
I mean, they said we never talk about price. If somebody says that costs too much, they immediately say we need to stop and talk about the value that you perceive from this engagement.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty smart. And I think the normal sales rep doesn't have to be a McKinsey consultant, but I think they do have to have a certain level of that storytelling and interdisciplinary kinds of competencies if they're going to have the kind of discussions that clients need.
Well, you have to make it relate to the customer, and you do that by storytelling. That's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yes. So there's a composite set of skills, and it's around that idea of you can't just go in and talk forever about a product. You have to be able to tell a story about how I'm going to help you do what you want to do.
Yeah, I see it all the time in the CRM field, which is where I'm a specialist in. That's people go in and they just do feature, and then they, even if they do relate it back to benefits, it's the benefits which they've predetermined without understanding what the customer's trying to achieve first. And that's, you know what?
Yesterday's news, it's not going to work.
No, exactly.
It's not going to work. Clients are smarter than ever.
Right, okay, let's move on to question 5. How can we maximize the investment in sales training?
Well, I thought about that one a little bit. First of all, we need to do that. I think we're going to have to do more training, which means it's going to have to be visible that it has an impact. I think there are 2 or 3 things we need to do. The first one, I think, is we don't do it, but it ain't that hard to do. And that's it. We need to think as much about what we do before the program and what we do after the program as we do the program itself. You talked earlier about the reinforcement thing. I think we have to get serious about that. After the program, you have to have a way to reinforce the skills that you taught in the program, or we know what happens. At the research that we did at Hathaway, we found after 3 months, 87% of the skills that were gained in the program were lost if they weren't reinforced, or 87 cents of every dollar you spent. And I think if you want to talk about reinforcement, you got to get serious and get off this notion that you can just buy your way out by buying a reinforcement kit that sits on the shelf. That's not what it's about. It's about coaching. I think we have to get serious about the sales managers reinforcing in the field the skills that were taught in the classroom. And you got to figure that out before you do the program. And if you can't figure that out, don't do the program.
Cool. I'm glad you raised that, because I think sales coaching is one of the core elements to reinforce the training, as you said. So how would you approach that? Do you do because quite often when I've seen sales training, and I have to admit to have not gone through any sales training for a number of years, is that any formal sales training, should I say?
Yeah.
Is that the managers are quite often in exactly the same classroom or area of learning, should we call it, as the salespeople. Do you recommend that they're done separately, or do you recommend they go through at the same time, then additional on top? How do you approach that?
Well, for example, we usually do it. We do a lot of sales simulations where there are no PowerPoints, and we create an entire mock company, and the whole program is around how are you going to go through the sales cycle with this simulated company. and so each group has to do that. So there's a lot of strategy sessions, a lot of role playing and so forth. So what we do is the day before the program, we work with the managers, talking about what's going on and the best practices to do what needs to be done in the various sales calls that the reps are going to be doing. And then in the program, we have a manager at every table. And the manager in the role plays the customer, so there's no fooling around. And that day earlier, we help them fine-tune their coaching skills, so they actually practice coaching the stuff in the classroom before they have to do it in the field. And then after the program, we spend time with them and say, okay, guys, how are we going to do this coaching in the field? And that usually gets, well, it's pretty tough. Well, all right. You have to have the senior VP of sales there who says, that's a problem, Jerry. I'll make that go away. So you have to do that. That's the way we usually do it. So yes, we do integrate them into the training. We spend in the training, however, time helping them get better about coaching, because a lot of the managers may know this stuff, but they're not that good at coaching, quite frankly. A lot of managers don't have that skill set. And it is a separate skill set. You can know it and not know how to coach it.
Absolutely, but then of course most sales managers are actually from the sales ranks, and they haven't been given any form of training again. Yeah.
Right. So I think this before and after thing is one way to maximize the impact. I think the other way to maximize impact, let's assume a company decides they do want to work with an outside vendor. I think they need to be more thoughtful about how they do that. A couple of specifics. One of the things I would do if I was in that situation on the company side of the table is I would totally do away with this idea of using requests for proposals. I think RFPs are just a terrible idea. And even a worse idea, which we use sometimes in the States, is the company will hire a consultant who runs the RFP process. So they're not engaged at all. Well, under the banner of being unbiased, they lose any sense of quality altogether. And then they say, well, we take care of that by bringing in the top 3 at the end and do a shootout. Well, those are a joke. They really are. You don't genuinely understand the difference between various vendors by listening to them for 40 minutes in a shootout. And the vendors don't get an opportunity to really generate creative solutions because all they know is what was in that RFP. They never really get a chance to do the kind of discovery that's necessary if you're really going to do innovative work. So one of the things I would do to maximize investment is I'd drop this RFP process and I would invest a lot more time up front selecting the vendor. I think I'd also sort of change the framing. I think I would stop thinking in terms of vendors and think in terms of partners. I want the supplier that I'm working with to be a partner. And I think that's different than just you parachute in, do a program, and get out of there as soon as you can. I think that's no longer acceptable. And if I was buying it, I wouldn't buy that. I want you to make a more serious investment with me, and I'm willing to write a bigger check if that's what you need. So those are a couple of things. I think the other thing I related to earlier, if you want to maximize impact, I think we have to relate more and more to the strategic initiative of the company. If the big deal is, hey, we've got to do something about selling this new product because it's going to be 50% of our revenue in the next 5 years, then develop a program specifically around that new product. Or if you're moving,
customized.
You customize it versus doing programs simply for the sake of doing a program. I mean, honestly, Richard, we've gotten calls where people say, well, I think we ought to do some sales training because we haven't done any for a while.
What's the goal?
Well, or we have a lot of people asking us, we've done a lot of stuff in strategy and skills, but we haven't done anything in negotiation. Yeah. I think we ought to do something in negotiation because we haven't done anything. Well, that's not planful. You can't maximize your investment if you simply do something because the hour has arrived to do it. You really have to think about how is this training going to maximize the important business initiatives of this company. Then you maximize impact, and then you get the people's attention. If I can help you do the direction setting of your company, then training is going to contribute to the party. Versus, hey, I just did some training and the people kind of liked it.
Yeah.
You know, that we're not going to be able to do more training. We're not going to get more serious about it unless we relate to things that matter.
Yeah, it does amaze me that it's. We find the same in the CRM industry as well. We ask people what they'd like, what they need to achieve. What are your goals? What's the business imperative to move forward with your CRM system? And we're told we'd like a CRM system. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything in
Right.
itself. You know, show me. You know, do you want to improve sales process? Do you want a centralized database of all your contacts? Whatever it happens to be, great. Give me something tangible that I can work around and help you with. But if you just turn around and give me fluff, then
Right.
what you're buying isn't going to work, regardless of whoever provides it.
Well, I think it is, Richard. I think it is a pervasive problem. I think it's not only true in sales training. I think it is true in CRM systems. I have a near and dear colleague who is in sales competencies, and they
Yep.
do really great work. But they get the same kind of telephone calls. They get things like, "Gee, we haven't revised our comp system for a while," or "So, you know, maybe we ought to do something different." Well, my lord, how can you really do something that contributes if that's all you know? I mean, you're just going to do something different. You're not going to do something better, you know, and you can't afford to do that anymore.
No, I think it's an organizational waste of everybody's time and effort and resources. Yeah, I completely agree. Okay, so we'll jump to the next one. What impact does sales training have on your CRM system?
Well, I think the bad news there is not as much as it should. You know, clearly more and more companies, for sure in the States, and I think it's true in Europe as well, are investing in CRM systems. And CRM systems today are light years of where they were 10 years ago. I mean, they really work. They're really important. And if you don't have one, you know, you're probably going to get one soon. Unfortunately, when I look at training, a lot of training is going on in companies that have CRM systems, and there's absolutely no relationship to the CRM system at all. It's never even mentioned.
Yep.
People ask me, you know, hey, we need to do some training, and somewhere in the discussion I will say, well, do you have a CRM system? Oh, yeah. I said, well, how do you think we ought to, you know, build that into the training? Oh, I don't know. It's pretty complicated. I'm not sure we need to tackle that. I'm just kind of want to focus on not good enough. Not good enough. I mean, if I would say two things about that is I would think every sales training program that you do ought to in some way help the reps better utilize the information that's in their CRM system. Now, granted, some programs, you know, may be better suited to do more of that than others, but there's no excuse why you don't do it. And on the flip side of that, I would say that inside of companies, the folks who are running the CRM system need to come to the party. They need to sit in on the training, and they need to watch reps strategize accounts and do role plays, because I think by doing that, they will better see the kinds of changes they need to make in the CRM system. You know, how can we repackage this so that it's more usable? You know, back to the comment made by Barbara about mobile thing. Is there some way that we can make this more mobile? Is there some way that we can package it so it's more usable? And I think you can see that by watching the reps in the thing, as well as the socialization. Talk with them.
Yep.
Hey guys, how could we make this thing more usable? Because the CRM systems are smart. Do a lot of reps maximize their use? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that.
I can tell the answer is probably not. Yeah.
Yeah, probably not. Well, and quite frankly, that's one of those skills. I think it's a skill.
Yeah.
You just don't wake up one morning with the computational ability to look at all this data and figure out how to translate it into useful information. That's a skill.
Right.
Well, I think it's a skill we ought to teach people, and then we ought to put it into application in our training programs. And I don't know, is that being done in Europe? Because in the States, I don't think it is. I mean, I know it is.
Yeah, it's there's a growing recognition in Europe, and I think it's the same in the US as well, that a lot of the CRM systems are data takers rather than providers. Right. So particularly for a sales force, it tends to be that the sales team are entering a great deal of information because they tend to be the customer focusing ones. Right. But they're getting little back from it, and CRM systems need to evolve to make sure they're giving more than they're taking back to these people, because you should be able to get input automatically from other data sources. You know, classic one being social and enabling a CRM system so you can see triggers from LinkedIn, etc.
Sure, absolutely, right. Now, but are people integrating that stuff into their sales training, or are they just expecting people to self-discover that somehow?
Yeah, there's a lot of, again, the CRM systems are technically capable of doing these sort of things, but a lot of them tend to be costly to turn around and configure your system. Right. And in which case it doesn't get done. But what the CRM system should be doing is reinforcing the training. It should have the questions which are relevant to the sales process at the different steps. It should have the documentation, your guides to what to do at the different stages in your sales pipeline to help reinforce the sales training. And then if the two are aligned, one reinforces the other and it works.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that 5 years from now that will be true. I mean, because it's just, the investments are significant, and it's just so logical that you have to do that I think that will get done. It may be painful.
It's really interesting actually, because there are, without trying to name some systems, there are some of the well-known systems where it's very well documented that it takes a long time, it takes weeks to alter their systems, should we say, and onboarding takes a lot. Weeks, months, etc., to get them on board. But actually, the newer products which have come out, like Pipeliner, and there are other systems may be available. We've done research on customers where, in actual fact, it takes less than a week to turn around and get your system up and running. It takes hours to embed your sales process within the system. The key being you have to know your sales process first, and you have to know how you want to reinforce it, which comes from people like you. But then once you've got that, it's easy to do. And the technology now, it makes it simple for the CRM systems to do that. But there are older generation CRMs which haven't caught up with that technology.
Yeah, and there's no question that I think some of those early systems, the reps got a really bad taste in their mouth about CRM systems because they fundamentally were spending all their time inputting data and didn't get much out. And so history has left some reps with a bad attitude because they haven't seen some of the second and third generation systems. So they think everything looks like that, and it doesn't. I mean, the new stuff doesn't look like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy to gain insights back into the system from multiple, like social, etc., and multiple data sources. And I think that really works. I think then you can explain that and show positivity within these systems to salespeople. Although even with some of the older ones, having done this for a while, I remember the data which you are collecting at least allows you to start analyzing the way your salespeople work to a certain extent. So, for example, I put in a CRM system into a lighting company, and I never knew there were so many different types of lights. Lights that keep trees, or don't light up a tree but doesn't keep it awake at night. Didn't realize trees needed to sleep at night, but hey.
Right.
And one of the things they found, of course, was they had the top sales rep had a third of the number of accounts as the next tranche down from him, basically. And it was because of the types of questions he was asking his accounts, so he was engaging with them throughout the sales process, rather than just calling saying, "Hi, it's Richard, how's it going? Yeah."
Yeah, I think one of the things that would help that integration thing is I think those of us in training, particularly in corporations, probably need to get a little bit smarter about CRM systems
Yeah.
They're a little intimidating to some of the folks in training. I think that's probably some people sitting down at a table together and getting a little bit smarter, and maybe the CRM people could learn a little more about what training can contribute. But that integration, I think probably has to occur.
Yeah, I think, yeah, because what ends up happening there is you're reinforcing each other, and that's fantastic, right. And that's how it's going to work. Standalone doesn't work with anybody these days. Integrated does, I think.
Right.
Okay, so which metrics would you suggest that you monitor for after-sales training to ensure that it's worked and to retain the knowledge?
Yeah, I think when it comes to metrics, I think it's again, a distinction is kind of important. I think it's important to distinguish between outcome matrix, things like more revenue produced, percent of revenue from a new product, versus skill metrics. Outcome metrics are the ones that get all the attention. Does the program increase the average revenue per rep? The problem with that is if you use that metric, it's very difficult to generate cause and effect. There are very few control pre-post test evaluation designs in sales training. So when you focus just on outcome measures like revenue produced per rep, you can't. If 6 months later there's more revenue, you can't contribute that to the sales training. You just can't establish the causal relationship. The other thing about that is it's not manageable. If I tell you, okay, we didn't improve it, I don't know what to do about that. I don't know how to manage that. All I know is I didn't get the results I want. So yes, you have to do that, but I think it's equally important to measure what I would call skill metrics. So if I was teaching a program on teaching people to ask questions, so like spin selling, for example, then one of the things I would do is I would measure, are they asking more questions? Are they asking better questions? And you can do that by having managers out in the field making some judgment about that. And if they're not asking better questions, then I need to go back to my training department and say, hey, this program is not working. Or, yeah, they kind of get it, but they can't do it when they're talking to senior people. So in the program, we need to build in more role plays where we simulate asking questions to senior executives because they aren't the same kind of questions. Well, all that is to say that I think when it comes to metrics, we ought to think in terms of two types. There's kind of a summative evaluation that occurs that tells me, did this program work? Did it do what you wanted it to do, like generate more revenue per rep? Yeah, you got to take a crack at estimating that. But you have to recognize, don't talk about cause and effect, but you can make some informed judgments about it. On the other hand, you also need to do some formative evaluation, which is getting information about how to improve the program and how to reinforce it, as well as did it work. And the important thing about that is those are different methodologies. They're not the same thing. You don't do A like you do B. So if I was talking about metrics with a client, I would say we need to set up two different kinds of metrics. One, hey, did you generate some of these outcomes that you were passionate about? Now, I need to caution you that don't do this cause and effect number on me. On the other hand, we also need to get data that will help you to make this program better the next time you do it. And that's the job of people like us who are selling the programs. And I would say people in general don't have very serious discussions around metrics. They do little, did you like it at the end of the program? And that's okay. But I think we need to probably get a little more serious about this whole metric issue.
Yeah, I would agree. How are you going to measure it otherwise? I think it's
right. Yeah, you can't expect to get a seat at the table if you don't prove that you deserve a seat at the table.
Cool. Do you have a blog post about that or an ebook that people could download?
Yeah, we've written a couple of things about that, and you can go to salestraining.com and look that up. We talked a bit about that. There's some. I think people are talking more and more about that stuff. I mean, people are getting a little more serious about the metrics question than they did again 5 years ago, which was all about just, you know, hey, I want some little survey that I can show somebody, or the other way, I want you to prove that you can increase my revenue by 20%, or I'm not going to buy the program. Well, I mean, that's just a nonsense discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
So yes, I think the discussions today are more reasonable, and I think they are occurring more frequently.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. Right. Well, I think unfortunately our hour is up. So thank you very much for being on, Dick. That was great stuff. I love that. If we need information, your website is again.
Well, a couple of places. One, you can go to our blog site, which is salestrainingconnection.com. And as I said, we do blogs 3 times a week, and there's over 500 blogs on there, and they're all archived by title. So, and on there you can also, like Barbara, could download a free mobile app for her iPhone. And there's all of our ebooks you can access through that site as well. And we have 3 or 4, and they're free. You can just download them. And of course, the blogs are free. The other thing you can do is you could go to our website, saleshorizons.com, and tap into one of our e-learning programs. And those we have a really, we would like to think a fairly good one on call planning skills, like asking questions and active listening and handling objections. And, you know, it's $100 a person, you know, for a 2-hour course. It's video driven. So that's another source. And then if you were wanting to do, you know, sophisticated kind of programs, then go to our sales momentum site. We talk about sales simulations and you know, more sophisticated kinds of programs. So those would be the 3 different sources. And you can also call us up. We'd love to talk to people. So we'll do that as well. And just before we part, we appreciate all the people who hung in here for the hour. We obviously we appreciate you coming, and Martha and Richard, thanks for inviting me. It's always fun to talk to you guys.
It was a true pleasure. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Welcome, Dick.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.